To be absolutely perfect, it would have been better to record this program on September 11th. But since it's going to be shown well after that, I could lie and say it's the morning of September 11th. No, it's not. It's the afternoon of September 10th, 2004, at a place that we're very familiar with, not only Calvin and me, but me before all this with Captain Frank and the old Juniper, and now the Naked Turtle and the dock area, and it just feels like hallowed ground for me. This is a very historic part of Plattsburgh, and we're delighted to be back again. The Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration has been building almost to a fever pitch after the last few years. Not that there haven't been wonderful celebrations in the past, on its 50th anniversary, on its 100th, on its sesquicentennial, and in 2014, I know I'm going to be around, Eric's still going to be around, and Calvin will still be hauling that camera if I have to push him around in a wheelbarrow to do it. But we're down here to talk about canal boats, and interestingly enough, I wrote a column sometime a week or two ago that'll be in the Press Republican this weekend in real time as we record this about canal boats, because I had a 2-page typewritten first-person story from a wonderful little lady who was born and brought up in Perry's Mills near Champlain, north of here, who had spent a lot of her childhood on board 2 canal boats that her father owned. And these first-person reports from the early 1920s, let's say, were just delicious. We're here to talk about something else, and we're here to meet Eric Tischenhook. He said, think of fishing hook. I'm pleased to meet you. Calvin's met you before because you did a show on the Philadelphia 2, right?
That's correct. When we took
12 years ago?
At least 12 years ago. Our second replica at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum was one of Benedict Arnold's gunboats, the Philadelphia 2, as we call it. She did a tour for a couple of years, stopping at all the major ports around the lake, including Plattsburgh area down at Valcour. And sure enough, I was one of the crew members on that boat, and I fondly remember Calvin and I believe it was Bob at the time, and
Bob Venn, the late
showing
Bob
him the boat.
Venn.
Yep.
That's wonderful. And for any of you who've been to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., you might see what's left of the original.
That's absolutely right.
I've seen it many times, and it's great to know that it came from our own Lake Champlain.
Yeah, and very much like that, our new replica is based upon the remains of those on the bottom of the lake. In this case, sailing canal boats. The General Butler and the O.J. Walker, both in Burlington Harbor, served as our models. We studied those through underwater archaeology, extracted information along with primary documents like the ones you were mentioning before, and the result is the Lois McClure, our sailing canal replica.
It's a wonderful experience to see something like this because it does transport us back in history. Not only do people dress in period costumes for this weekend, but when you can bring, as far as we can tell, an exact replica of one of those sailing canal schooners from almost 150 years ago. That's pretty neat stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Were you in on it from the beginning, Eric?
I have been. I've been working with the museum since with the Philadelphia tour, and even before that, since it was open. And I've been with this project, along with other aspects of the museum, largely involved with the education. In fact, today we just had 140 students.
You took a deep breath just as we drove up.
Yeah, a very good day, though. For me, as an educator, what better classroom could you ask for? You want to talk about history of the lake, you want to talk about the commercial era, talk about the people of places like Plattsburgh and Champlain and the rest of the Champlain Valley. This is, for me, the best way to do it. Get them on board these.
And to encourage, if not incite, the wonderful imaginations of these little kids is the bottom line. You start them getting interested and excited in history, and they're going to perpetuate what you and I start.
We hope so. I mean, many of us appreciate that the lake is a special place, and we're hoping that get them interested and get them excited about this stuff. Use literally vehicles like this one, to start that flowing, that interest flowing. We believe that they'll get a better appreciation of the lake that's around them and hopefully become good stewards of that lake and take care of it for the special place it is.
Well, it's not a replica of the Mayflower, but it's a pretty darn good replica. And we're going to go on board. But first, I want to find out a little bit more about you personally. Where were you born and brought up? I know you live in Vergennes now.
I was born in St. Albans, Vermont. Ended up going to the University of Vermont in Burlington, and now reside closer to the Maritime Museum down in Vergennes area. And as I said, I've been with the museum now for 18 years. And my primary role, I'm now Director of Education, but also one of the underwater archaeologists. So I was fortunate enough, and that's actually what sparked my interest. You talk about pulling people in and providing them with something that brings their interest to it. I started diving when I was 14. The very first shipwreck I dove on was the General Butler.
That wasn't really? That's only Providence that you should be with this today then, right?
It really is. What could be more satisfying than to then be part of the archaeological team which extract the information, and then part of the team that helped bring it together. And I have to say, it is a huge team. We had boat builders, volunteers, fundraisers. It's an absolutely enormous list of people who have supported the project, including here in Plattsburgh, Northern Insuring, helping to bring us here as a sponsor. So very important.
It's teamwork, isn't it? And volunteer effort, besides the people that actually make money to get involved. It blows my mind as to how much interest has been generated in this replica over the last few years. The fact that it's called a Lois McClure, named after a wonderful philanthropic lady who deserves so much credit for getting behind this project from the very beginning, right?
It's wonderful folks like that, and they've been supportive of Lake Champlain's heritage all along the way, helping out with the restoration of the Ticonderoga and other lake-oriented projects. It is folks like that that really make our communities better places to be.
I bet you never taught her to scuba dive, though, did you?
I haven't taken Lois scuba diving.
But I should mention right here that people took up scuba diving just so they could dive on some of these wrecks in preparation for making this replica.
You do your homework. Yeah, I was one of the instructors for the boat builders. There were 3 primary boat builders, plus some others on staff, as well as our volunteers, and we put them through a course, a scuba course, in order to give them the first-hand experience. It's a real tangible connection for everyone. And for these guys who are in the process of building this, we want to have a historical appreciation, but also the physical appreciation of these boats. And these guys go down and they look at it from the mindset of the boat builder, and looking at every single detail. You know, they can be working on the boat one minute and go, how's that put together? And then a day later they can be underwater looking at that section of the boat and actually recreating it. So
it's great to see what people are doing with serious science these days. In the old days, when I started scuba diving, you put the tank on, you went to the bottom. If you found an old dish, you brought it back and showed it to a few people. And now we're doing underwater archaeology. We're doing, on this side of the lake, we're doing some wonderful things in the area of the Battle of Valcour. We've been doing that for a couple of years with some of my favorite people who are diving on this side and finding glorious stuff. The best part of it is there are a lot of canal boats on the bottom of Lake Champlain. If the truth be known, we've tried to map some of them.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing inventory of shipwrecks. The popularity of the canal boat, and really the reason we chose this boat, one of the reasons we chose this boat, is because it is the most populous watercraft of the 19th century, of the 1800s commercial era. We are now finding through research that just in the Champlain Valley, through the 100+ years that this canal was active, we will see 4,000 of these boats that are constructed. So I guess it only makes sense.
That's kind of amazing, isn't it?
It's absolutely incredible. 250 will be the sailing variety like this, but it only stands to reason that you're going to find them on the bottom of the lake, and lots of them. So we have a pretty good window into these boats, not only how they were constructed, but into the lives of the people who were using them. As you're going to see, there is sections for living on board this vessel. So it's an unbelievable. It's a time capsule. Some of these boats, we worked on one up in Sloop Island the last 2 years, a later class than this boat, a little bit larger. But when she sank, it obviously went down in duress as the contents of the cabin were still completely intact. You looked inside of that cabin and you could identify chairs, beds, drawers with silverware, clothing, Crocs, dishes stacked up.
Wow.
And as you'll see in our boat, it reflects what we've learned from these vessels.
You know, it's impossible in the time allotted, and you know, we like to do as comprehensive a story as we can in the hour and a half or 2 hours that we spend on these shows. We can't give you all the history of the Lake Champlain Canal and the entire Erie and Barge Canal system, and how the boats got here from Quebec City and all the way down through this lake. Suffice to say that until the railroads came along, these waterways were our roadways, and they transported huge amounts of materials with sail and then with steam and through the canals with mules and horses, and it was a whole piece of history that will probably never be recovered except this way today.
You're absolutely right. I mean, from our perspective today, you see the tractor trailers going down the road. You see the occasional freight train coming through town, and that's how we see goods coming and going. Before railroad, before automobile, this was the vehicle. And when you look at our communities, these are the vessels that shaped them, our waterfronts. It was fabulous to have the students down here today, having them envision barrels full of apples from Rolf's Orchard coming down here, being stacked up on the waterfront, and literally a boat like this could carry well over 2,000 barrels of apples down to New York City. Well, you look at the little canal over here where the weather wax is often docked, and see the old railroad tracks disappearing into the ground. This was a thriving hub of the industry, of the driving economics, and the shapes of our waterfronts in Plattsburgh and in Burlington and Essex, New York, and all of these waterfront communities were built on the backbone of shipping on Lake Champlain by boats like these.
And to think of the engineering logistics that had to be done to build these canal systems right around and just after the time that we're commemorating this weekend in the Battle of Plattsburgh, you know, with shovels and pickaxes and native labor, and then our wonderful ancestors from Ireland who came over to work on these canals. Incredible. It would be difficult to do by today's standards, but to build these beautiful waterways and to set up this commerce way back in the early 1800s is almost beyond what we can believe, and that's why it behooves us to talk to people like you and to read the history books and just to see what it was like.
Yeah, it is a great connection with the commemoration of the 1814 event. With the close of the War of 1812 and continued tensions with Canada, which was our primary trade partner, people began to look to alternate routes. And of course, the merchants and growing metropolis of New York City was rapidly exhausting and depleting their natural resources in the Hudson. The logical answer to them was to go north. The Erie and Champlain canals were both conceived around the same time, started around the same time in 1817, just a couple years after this event. And will continue. The early parts of the canal are already being used by 1819, not completed, and by 1823 it's open for business. 2 years before the Erie Canal is, so we had a little bit of jump on the Erie Canal here in Champlain. So it is what shaped our communities.
I love it. What do you say we go aboard and you show us this wonderful ship?
Why don't we do that?
Let's do it.
Sorry.
Well, in lieu of the slideshow tonight, we got props, right, Eric?
Absolutely.
We got props. Let's begin our little tour right in front of the Lois McClure. Wait a minute, that rhymed. What do we got here?
Here we are, starting with the northern waterway. And by the way, anybody who comes down and visits our boat, no matter what port's in, is going to have an opportunity to see these panels, along with talk with all of our interpreters, and admission's free to come on the boat. So what you have here, well, this should look familiar to anyone who's familiar with the Battle of Plattsburgh. We're talking about the end of the military era. Commerce had begun truly before that, but this put a slight damper, particularly with our trade with Canada, as I mentioned before. Traditionally, Lake Champlain had been used from a commercial standpoint. A majority of our commerce had flowed north, despite the rapids on the Richelieu River. You could travel south, but it was a difficult series of passages, either through Lake George or continuing down Lake Champlain and crossing over to the Hudson. The realization of this being these two together combined to form what we call the Northern Waterway, a complete north-south connection. And that's exactly what's going to happen in 1823 when that gap is bridged. And over here you can see the southern tip of Lake Champlain, the Champlain Canal, as you mentioned, back-breaking labor. You're going to see 63 miles of hand-dug canal to connect these two waterways by 1823, and really it's an overnight transformation. Vessels will be springing up, shipyards will be making the new type of boat, the canal boat. Now early on we call these the experimental era, from the 1823 up through the mid-1830s. People are experimenting with designs on these boats, not quite sure what's going to work best, and particularly with the sailing canal version of that. Most of the canal boats, as I mentioned before, are going to be standard canal boats like these here. No independent means of propulsion, no engines on these boats, no sails on these boats. They were barges, and these things would be towed at first by side-wheeling steam vessels and then eventually by tugboats, the more traditional tugboats that we think of today. At first, when the steam engines are weaker, small tows, but eventually those tows will easily be 30 to 40 vessels at a time, putting 3, 4 together wide and then stacking them up end on end. Great, enormous tows on Lake Champlain and on the Hudson River.
That's funny. I wrote my column, and my wife edits my column. She was reading, and she looked at me and she said, "What's a tow?"
A tow.
Because, you know, who would know?
Sure.
Unless they had read about it.
A TOW, not a TOE.
That's right. What's a tow? I said, here's one.
Falling into tow.
Yep.
And it's an intriguing lifestyle of its own. It really formed there was a society of canalers, because these folks, if you can imagine, you've got a vessel, you're the captain of that boat. By the 1860s, we're seeing the waning of all male crews and the emergence of families coming on to these vessels. And so you've got family units, other boats coming alongside, and while in tow with 20 or 30 other boats, you're going to begin to know these people. They become a community. They live together, work together, play together, and are able to hop from boat to boat as they go. When in a tow with a standard canal boat, if let's say you pick up the tow in Whitehall and it's destined for Burlington, it does not slow down nor stop for people to get off and on. So if you had to get off at Port Henry, you simply cast off the tow, drifted into port. If you were good at your timing, you made it. If not, you'd have to pull yourself in, push it. And we're looking at boats 80, 100, 160 tons of vessel and cargo being moved at a time. So
it's amazing. There are some, I mentioned this relatively modern first-person account that I fell in touch with that hasn't been published beforehand. But there are other first-person accounts, some of them real, some of them recreated based on research. And Hawthorne himself took a trip through the canal system and wrote about it only as Hawthorne could write, and his language was beautiful, and I felt as though I was right there with him when I read it. So
there are a number of counts, and the most exciting from our standpoint was recently a relative, a descendant of one of these canalers named Theodore Bartley, located his journals from the 1860s, 30 years worth of his work.
Were you involved in the editing? I know Art was.
I was not involved with the editing. We have recreated it. It was voluminous, and it's been edited down to a single volume, and Russell Bellico did that work, noted historian and author in our region.
Art wrote a foreword?
That is correct. That is correct.
For those people who know Mr. Bellico, we've interviewed him numerous times, and he's a great friend of the history of Lake Champlain, as everyone must know.
He's a fabulous author and a great friend to the lake and a great friend of the Maritime Museum. We've been honored to have him at our museum doing talks before and, of course, editing some of these works.
That product is finished now, isn't it?
It is finished, and it's for sale through the Maritime Museum.
I thought we dropped that in.
That's nice.
All right, moving right along, Eric.
the reality of the standard canal boat became evident. You had to wait to be towed. You would have to pay the individual who was towing you. And from the very beginning, there was a mindset on some of the locals that independence was a nice way to go. And the creation of the sailing canal boat, both sloop-rigged with a single mast and schooner-rigged, it would be a reality. In fact, the very first vessel to go through the Champlain Canal upon its completion was a sailing canal sloop named the Gleaner, built in St. Albans, Vermont. So these boats had their limitations. They only are going to sail when the weather is favorable for them, although we have found that this boat sails rather well. It does point up into the wind a bit better than we had anticipated, but they really do prefer to go with the wind. The other limiting factor is once you reach the Champlain Canal, you are forced to take your rigging down, and that's a time-consuming and labor-intensive project. As you can see, the masts are some 50 feet tall, so it's a big piece of labor. But nonetheless, 250 of these were going to be produced in the Champlain Valley. The type you're looking at here would have first appeared in 1858. The locks had reached the size of 90 feet in length and 15 feet wide. So this vessel is 88 feet long and 14.5 feet wide. Everything about it is designed to maximize the amount of cargo. You get paid by the ton, so the more you can carry, the better off you're going to be. In some cases, you could literally carry too much. Once your draft got deep enough, you would not fit into the canal. They would actually hire another boat to lighter off the load, put it into another boat who would then follow you through the canal and then reload on the other side of it.
And guess what? In 2004, there are size limits to the craft that can go through the St. Lawrence Seaway, but they're a little bit longer than 88 feet.
You got that right, and they're going to be, the Champlain Canal will be enlarged again after the eventually the canal will be completed in 1862, which is the year we're portraying here. It'll be enlarged again in the 19th century, and the Champlain Barge Canal, which we have today, is the early 20th century, and now the locks are over 300 feet long and over 40 feet wide, so we could fit a couple of them at a time in the locks today. Some wonderful, we just mentioned Theodore Bartley, some incredible local figures are coming around, that the light just keeps shining brighter on these folks, people like Captain William Montgomery, who owns several vessels on Lake Champlain, a rough and ready fellow. He went out when others wouldn't, and thus has a lot of stories to tell us with some of the mishaps that took place, including one shipwreck, the General Butler, from which this is modeled. So we have to thank him in part for giving us a vessel in which to copy, to make the replica. And then the end of this era is really spelled out with the railroad. I mean, the railroad comes along in the middle of the 19th century, and canaling will continue to grow. Volumes of material will continue to grow in conjunction with that. But the handwriting was on the wall. The railroad could run through the winter. It was able to drop its freight rates, and you're going to begin to see the decline of canaling. The phenomenon I mentioned earlier of families coming on board is partly an economic phenomenon. You're going to see captains no longer being able to hire on crew. It's just going to be cheaper to close down the home in the summertime and take families with them. So, and then of course we witness the barge canal when it comes along. You can now have larger steel barges coming through, and the age of the wooden watercraft is very quickly dwindling. There's still some around, 1920s and 30s, but they're getting fewer and far between at that point. This panel depicts some images I mentioned earlier, the Isle Lamont wreck, the Isle Lamont canal boat that we excavated over a 2-year period. This is an image from that boat. The stern cabin was very useful in reconstructing stern cabins of the day. The vessel depicted on the bottom is the O.J. Walker, one of the direct models we used for this. She went down in the 1890s with a load of brick, as you can see, scattered along the deck. The hand trucks were still there, the pallets that held the brick, the steering mechanism, which we'll see recreated in just a moment. Even the sailing rig, although fallen down, was still there. So all extremely useful, about 90% intact. In terms of from an archaeological standpoint, there's a lot to work with there. Many times in the ocean, we might be lucky to work with 10% of a wreck because of teredo worms and other organisms that eat the wood, but not here in Lake Champlain. It really does remarkable job preserving these things for us.
You know, we're preserving history as we step around here and talk about this ship, and as we do all of these programs during the commemoration of the Battle of Plattsburgh. But I want to underline something that we talked about before. This part of the United States has more history, military and naval history, and this kind of history than almost any spot in the entire country.
We like to believe it's the most.
We don't even know a portion of it yet.
We like to believe it's the most historic body of water in North America. It was instrumental in the shaping of our country. From the British Empire, the French Empire, the birth of the United States, and right through the commercial era. This is an unbelievably significant waterway, and we hope that projects like this help bring it to light for more folks.
This is beautiful. This just shows the construction. And
that's right. It was a 3-year project overall, 17 months over the course of 3 years. Lumber from Vermont, from New York, and other regional forests went into the construction. Almost all the same original woods that would have been found in these boats. It also, this particular photograph shows you just how boxy they are. These are flat-bottom boats. The central portion is really like a barn. It's mortise and tenon joints. It is only when you get to the bow and to the stern of the vessel where she begins to look like a boat at all, and not just a large box for carrying goods. And as you'll see when we board, indeed that was the case. The forward and stern section of the boats were more of a functional use for the operations of the boat in living conditions, while the central portion, a solid 85% of it, was dedicated to the cargoes that gave them the money they needed to run.
That's beautiful. All right, and all the people who've made it possible. You know, we've quoted a figure of $1.5 to $2 million on the overall construction cost, but had there not been literally hundreds of people volunteering time, the cost would have been even more astronomical.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, you walk into that shipyard and on a given day you're going to see at least a dozen people who are volunteering their time to drive the nails, to put the paint on, to put the caulking in the decks and so on. And those are the ones that you can see. And then there's the folks who are out there in the community who are stitching garments for the educators, who are putting up posters to tell people we're coming into town, the people who are helping to raise money for us as well. It's all a community, a sense of community. And not unlike the Canalers themselves, who worked together and helped one another. If someone got in trouble, they pulled together, and without the community effort, without the support of places like Plattsburgh and all the other towns we're going to, this would not be a reality. It's something that everybody should take some pride in and definitely stop in to see. It's
an absolute dream coming true for you because you've been so much involved with it. But for those of us who've watched the project since the very beginning, it's really wonderful. And we're getting in fairly close to the beginning of this maiden tour around Lake Champlain, aren't we?
That's right. We've been so far a brief stop in Westport. We've been by Vergennes and our own museum at Basin Harbor. We have also been up to St. Albans, which was our first stop in which we had school groups, which have been well received, and we have over 2,500 students scheduled for this fall, Plattsburgh being no exception. And we continue on with the other major lake ports, including Essex and Whitehall, Shoreham. We're going to be back in Westport again until we end our tour in October, late October, in Burlington. Next year gets real exciting. This is almost a warm-up for us as we begin on one of the traditional routes of these boats. We're going to go down through the Champlain Canal, down the Hudson River to New York City and be at South Street Seaport.
Is that cool or what?
It's going to be very cool.
Is that about as cool as it gets?
I'm looking forward to that waterfront property in New York City for at least a couple of weeks anyway.
Now, you young people and you old people who went down the wrong paths in your lifetime and worked at jobs that you couldn't love, and I hear people gripe and complain every day. Can you imagine what life must be like for a guy like this who has this obvious passion for what he does and he gets a paycheck? How could life be any better than it is for you?
I got to tell you, it's a pretty rewarding opportunity, and one of the directions that I was hoping to go in was to become a captain, licensed captain, and to get involved with replicas. And the museum has offered that venue to me. And
Really?
I'm working by being able to be on this boat and to work with very talented people like Captain Roger Taylor, who was also the captain for our Philadelphia tour. What could be better than on-the-job training here? I'm getting it, and I'm very excited. And part of it was my ability to help to establish and run the school programs that allowed me to do this. So I'm enjoying every minute of it.
Several times throughout the course of the program, and yes, we are going to go on board. Don't be nervous, kids. I want to take time to promote the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum again, because it's a marvelous asset to the North Country and both sides of the lake. It's helped to erase some of that parochial spirit that some people have determined that this imaginary Mason-Dixon line existed between New York and Vermont. It's concerned with the history, the maritime history of both sides of the lake, the entire Lake Champlain region, now that we've become familiar with that term. And that's a good thing. And a young woman who used to be my partner, who now does something else for a living, told me that she and her boyfriend took a tour of the museum, and she couldn't wait to come into work this past Tuesday and gush about her tour of the museum. And that's what it's all about for people like you who put so much time and effort into it.
We think the story is well worth telling, and I'm really glad you made that connection. It's all too soon we forgot that Lake Champlain is not the boundary we make it out to be today. It's almost an inconvenience for the commuters as they have to go across the ferries or across the bridges, and divides New York and Vermont. In its day, it connected us. Remember that it was the easiest way to travel, and it would have been far more likely that your closest neighbors were going to be directly across the lake rather than 5 miles up the road. There was very close-knit ties, and it is a shared history, an incredibly important history, not just to New York and Vermont, but to the nation as well. And we should be proud, both New York and Vermont, to be able to share that with people. So it's been wonderful working with the people. You mentioned the Valcour Island project that's been going on. For us to be able to work with them to help make it a reality, it couldn't have been any better. It was just wonderful folks to work with. So it's all part of what we do.
Let's have a look, a close look, up front and personal, with the Lois McClure. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All aboard that's coming aboard, right? Every time you open your mouth, all I can think of is that great old song, Low Bridge. Everybody down.
Yeah.
And the mule named Sal.
Yeah, that's right.
Boy, that became synonymous with the canal boats, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're on the bow.
We are on the bow, and as you can see, when you picture a sailing boat, particularly an old wooden sailing boat, most folks envision a much more pointy boat, a little more sleek up in the front and with a long bowsprit. But once again, we come back to this boat being specifically designed to carry cargo and fit within a canal. The locks were 90 feet, this is 88, and they didn't waste any room with the bowsprit. So all of our stays for the mast come down and tie in directly into the stem post on this boat. A very impressive piece of equipment on this vessel is the windlass, which is used to primarily haul in anchors, but any heavy moving on the boat, this particular device could be used. We also could have, for example, assisted with the raising of masts on this vessel, or bringing her into a tow by bringing heavy lines around those drums to bring it on. This is, I should mention that this is a replica, so you're not going to find original pieces. There's only one piece, this anchor.
I noticed that.
This anchor.
Tell me about it.
It is. It is an old anchor, and exactly like the ones you would have found on canal boats like this. And it is the only piece. Everything else, including even the windlass, has been replicated. These are still being manufactured. The one difference you would have seen on the Champlain canal boats was that this would have been cast iron instead of bronze. But we're pretty happy with it, and it's proven extremely useful already. So,
was it already made, or did somebody make it for you?
We had it specifically made for us. The gentleman does make them, but we had to specify the size. So,
I love it.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
What's the stick called?
It's called a stick.
Yeah.
just so we get an idea what it looks like. We've read stories of accidents that happened while these canal boats were being towed through the canal system, where people would get their leg caught in a rope.
There's a fabulous story of a man who had recently lost his deckhand, not in a fatality, mind you, but just the guy quit. And he brought up a young lad, a green lad, off a farm in New York. There was a certain mystique that went along with being on a canal.
Yes.
You know, you're stuck on a farm, and here are these guys going back and forth on the lake. And this young lad decided that was the life for him. Well, as they came into Ticonderoga, they had separated from the tow. They found out he wasn't going to make it, and so ran forward where the lad was standing to cast the anchor off. And as he did so, found out his leg was in the coil of line. Not the lad, the captain. The captain promptly went overboard with the anchor. Fortunately, it wasn't very deep there in Ticonderoga. Freed himself, swam back up, got on the boat, and said, "There, that's how you set an anchor. I hope you were paying attention. I wanted to show you the right way the first time, and next time it's your turn." Well, needless to say, upon reaching Ticonderoga, the boy was high-footing it on shore, but would have happened right up in this part of the boat.
You gotta love it. Look at this.
This is the basic technique. Just hauling in the chain. You'll notice it's disappearing below deck where we have a chain locker. About 250 feet of this chain, making our total weight and chain alone just about 1,500 pounds.
No kidding. That's amazing.
Right. Yeah.
And the early chains might have been even harder or heavier than this chain too.
Yeah, it's likely you would have had some leader chain, but also you would have switched over to a hawser cable, a heavy line, and that would have been wrapped around the drum and basically done the same thing to haul it in.
And you're right. That story he told and the story I told were only a few of the accidents that happened. I mean, this was a rough business, hauling all the different kinds of things they hauled. And yes, there are stories of kids that went overboard.
Absolutely.
Having to try to stop the tow to go back and get the kids. And
it was
very interesting stories.
Common practice in one incident when a lad went over, they decided that it was a wise idea to keep suspenders, braces as they called them, on him, so that the boat hook could be used to conveniently grab them back out again. And it was common practice in the back of the boat where the family's cabin was to put a ring bolt on the top and tie the children off when they were too young to stop them from falling off the boat. This is one difference with our boat, is these lifelines, the cables that go around the outside edge for the safety of the people who come on board. They would not have existed back in the age of Canal, where the green paint ends on the bulwarks. That would have been all, just about 8 inches, just enough to catch your foot and trip you over the side of the boat, and that was about it.
You know, as we've said before, and we can say again, this replication of the Butler and other boats here, as you see here, in this replica, is pretty darn faithful. Of course, to be able to navigate on Lake Champlain, we have to have certain accoutrements and amenities.
That's right.
And we have to have a radio on board and a few other things.
That's right. Safety's number one, of course, and we have to do that. We have things like our buoys to toss overboard. We, of course, have life jackets, fire extinguishers on board, etc. It is, however, a faithful enough replica where we cannot take passengers out for joyrides on this. We have an attractions vessel license where when we're at a dock we can allow passengers on board, but we can't just take folks out for sails on the lake. It's one of the limiting factors of making a truly accurate replica faithful to the original.
It's just the picking of mass trees when they made these schooners in those days was an interesting spectacle all by itself. They had to be pretty darn straight, and you had to have a pretty good eye, and you hoped they wouldn't crack and split like
doing a little checking there. Yeah,
did.
Pretty commonplace white spruce, and these are from Danville, Vermont, if I recall. These two trees that you see here. You're also looking at one of the unique features of a sailing canal boat. A traditional schooner, this mast would drop through the deck and be stepped in the keelson, or basically the backbone of the boat, well below the down below decks. In this case, when you are approaching the canals and you needed to take down your sailing rig, that would slow you down tremendously. So they facilitated or made it easier for themselves to drop the mast by stepping them on deck. This tabernacle or box you see here contains the base of the mast, and it stops on the deck we're standing on. There is a metal bracket around the outside which opens up on the after edge or the back side of it, and this provided you with a pivot point on which to lower the mast down.
Isn't it amazing that you learn nomenclature every time you get into a new field? And tabernacle was a new one on me when I started to study about the schooners. Right. I love it.
That's right.
It had a slightly different meaning for me as a preacher's kid back in the 1940s. All right. Next.
Before you go on, you just have to imagine people lived on these boats, and you can imagine 2-year-old up here on the deck.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I know that.
They did go overboard.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no question about it. And
it was common sight on a boat like this, in the area we're actually standing here. They would not just fill the hold with cargo. They would load it on deck. They would deck load them as well. You could see deck loads of lumber that would be 8 feet high on this main deck. So you're not going to see a lot of kids running in this part. But if we move aft, I can show you the cabin area and what would be the quote-unquote outdoor play area for the kids.
Let's
on a boat like this.
walk and talk as we go, Eric, because the people, we want to give people a virtual view of what this tour is all about.
We're coming now by the main mast here, which is about 50 feet high. The boom, which supports the bottom of the sail, is also about 50 feet long, and the gaff on top of it. You can raise this with 2 people, but I got to tell you, 4 is a lot more enjoyable.
I can understand
a lot of sail area
where
here.
you're coming from.
Yep.
You don't do this for every group of kids that comes on board.
No, we don't
either.
raise the sail for every group of kids.
Oh, golly. And you know, we've had some weather come through this area over the last couple of days, not as bad as some people had predicted. But this craft is pretty seaworthy, as you've said before, even more so than you anticipated.
She is. She's pretty weatherly
You've
boat.
been through some 4 and 5 foot waves with it, haven't you?
I wouldn't say 4 or 5 foot yet.
Really?
We have been that south wind we had that blew so hard. We were fortunate enough to be in Grand Isle, so we were spared the brunt of it. We might have been out in some 3 foot rollers, and we got bounced around a bit, but she does amazingly well. Even more stable. At times, I forget I'm on the water when we're moving. In water that would normally bounce you around pretty good, she hardly moves at all. So,
and some of these canal boats that are on the bottom are there because they just got tired. They used them and used them and used them, and over a span of 20, 25 years, they wore out. Some of them caught fire, some of them did go aground, but some just got tired.
Plain wore out. If you got 30 years out of one of these boats, you had done well. Like we take a car to the junkyard today, they took these out and scuttled them.
That's it.
Strip all the useful material off of them, and, well, I guess at that point, if you just stop pumping, it's probably going to end up on the bottom of the lake. And there's areas in places like South Bay and Whitehall where they're lined up one next to the other, where they had just been allowed to sink.
And the beautiful part of it is many of these wrecks have been spotlighted and highlighted. And scuba divers, recreational divers, can dive on a lot of wrecks in Lake Champlain, view them in what has now become their natural habitat, and leave them alone and go back with the wonderful memories. As I said, in the old days, it was customary for people to grab pieces, and now to leave it there, isn't it a glorious thing, so that everybody can enjoy it for generations to come.
We're happy that the trend and the mindset has become to protect these for future. We realize that it's a non-renewable resource. Once this stuff is gone, it's gone for good, and it really does belong to all of us as New Yorkers and as Vermonters, and we should all be able to enjoy it. And the great news is that programs like the Underwater Historic Preserves, of which both New York and Vermont are a part of on Lake Champlain, divers can access the original sites. Both the General Butler and O.J. Walker, from which this was modeled, are open to the public, and they can dive on them. And even if you're a non-diver, come enjoy something like this and see the original artifacts in museums. That's where they should be for all to enjoy.
So talk about where we are and what we are looking at. Let me move over next to you. All right.
We've come all the way to the stern of the vessel. This, unlike I mentioned, most of the rest of it was was cargo area. They would extend it quite a ways back and even onto the cabin roof here, which we'll see in a little while as the family space on the boat or the crew space on the vessel. This would also often be seen with an awning over the top of it on hot summer days, or I guess this summer would be rain. Laundry seen flapping out here, and this is where you might set your children to playing or get them out of the cabin and up into this section of the boat. So
that canvas awning, that was typical of these canal barges right up into the 1920s and 30s, because this little girl who was 8 or 9 years old described that awning. So I'm delighted that you brought that up today and how wonderful it was to take tea beneath the
That's right. That's absolutely right. Play some music, whatever happened to be for relaxing times, which were few and far between. We also are at the steering mechanism for the boat. Most of these canal boats had just a straight tiller bar connected to the rudder post in the back. It was able to turn the rudder simply by turning this bar from one side of the boat to the other. This appeared on some vessels. It was what became commonly referred to as the shin cracker wheel. It's tied into the tiller, and you'll very quickly learn why they refer to it as a shin cracker, because as you begin to spin the wheel, the tiller bar in turn moves with it. So it gives you a bit of mechanical advantage, a little bit easier to operate the boat with this type of system. You don't see this on all the boats, but it did appear at least on the O.J. Walker. So if you look over the back of the boat, we'll see the rudder. And one of the unique features of the rudder is the drop-down center of it. The center can be lowered down for common steering, both in the canal at low speeds as well as getting a little extra purchase out on the lake. The problem was that rudder made it, even when they came into the locks, they had to turn the rudder completely sideways, but that would mean it would have stuck out beyond the width of the boat. So the retractable center portion of it allowed them to fit into the canal with that larger rudder. So.
That's interesting. Yeah. And how about the keel? What does that look like?
There really isn't a keel. There's a keel plank, which sits down about 5 inches below the rest of the boat. The real magic of the sailing on this is the centerboard. We have a centerboard which is approximately 17 feet long. It's on a pivot and can lower down approximately 8 feet below the water. That's what gives us the ability to really sail into the wind whatsoever.
Okay, what's next?
Well, let's go below.
All right, let's go below. We've been banished below, and we're in the cargo hold.
That's right.
Talk a little bit about what we see as Calvin pans the camera.
Well, in the cargo hold, you're looking at the vast majority of the space on this boat. As we mentioned, these were designed to move goods. We have one example of that in the form of the large marble blocks that you see. Those actually would have filled the hold if that was our true load that we were carrying. We have firewood on board here as well. That firewood stokes our stove that we have on board, but that also could have been a cargo that was moving from one place to another. And we have also numerous barrels down below here, which could represent any number of cargoes. Some of them leaving, like the apples here in the Champlain Valley, getting ready to go down to New York City. You might have seen salts and molasses products coming back up into the Champlain Valley once you got to New York City. And down here we've collected a number of goods that would have both left and come back into the Champlain Valley. Our agricultural, the smaller farms, when the canals arrived, were being replaced. These farmers were expanding and enlarging their farms because it wasn't just subsistence farming anymore. These folks could now produce on such a level they could sell outside, because now we can move perishable goods fast enough. You can be in New York City in a week, which meant that moving things like these great Champlain Valley apples. Thank you, Oak Street School came down today and brought us some
I love it.
We're going to see grains, oats and barleys leaving the Champlain Valley. Second largest, the largest thing leaving was going to be processed lumber. It will be, by far, will lead all other things leaving the Champlain Valley through the Champlain Canal. Second, however, will be iron ore. The Adirondacks are rich in it. And this material is going to leave. Some of it will be processed here, but much of it will end up down in the Hudson River Valley, and we'll see returning manufacturing goods as a result of that. Iron ore leaving, finished products coming back in. We've found shipwrecks loaded with wood stoves, cast iron tea kettles, and regular kettles on board, farm equipment sunk on the bottom of the lake. All those horses in New York City aren't going to find any green grass there, so we're going to ship our hay down there. Even ice, which has been harvested in the wintertime and stored in ice houses, was packed up in here. These were fast enough to move dairy goods to New York City before spoilage occurred. So
it's amazing, isn't it?
It really is incredible. It's a revolution, really, and we're going to, for the first time in the Champlain Valley, see seafood arriving. Probably the number one thing coming back up here is coal. All of the locomotives, all of the steamboats that were up here, they need this coal to run. And down along Jersey Shore, or excuse me, down on the Hudson, connecting with the Erie, coming out of Pennsylvania, you're going to find a lot of coal. Bricks. Got a lot of brickyards into Champlain Valley, and so these were moved in these canal boats. It wasn't always that canal boats went strictly through the canal. Sailing canal boats are also later on going to be used for just strictly interlake trade. You're going to see them moving goods just within the Champlain Valley, because then they don't have to worry about taking their mast down every time.
True.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful space, and this is fairly typical of the size of the Lake Champlain schooners. That's why you chose this style, because there were a lot of them working at the time just like this.
Absolutely. This was a popular time frame with a lot of these styles of vessels here. We mentioned earlier the presence of a centerboard in this boat, and that's the only thing that really occupies this space other than the cargoes that were here. You're viewing down the centerboard trunk, which is basically a large empty box which is open at the bottom and thus has water in it. Inside of it is the center board, just a huge board, weighs approximately 1,000 pounds, and would be lowered down to give this boat the stability and allows it to really sail into the wind to become a sailboat.
Does the centerboard work?
Oh yeah,
Does it? Have you put it down, up and down?
Absolutely,
No kidding.
absolutely, yeah. It may still be down a couple feet right now. No, it's all the way up because the pin's in. Really, if you want to sail with the wind on your beam at your side,
Sure.
or you want to sail into the wind, you've got to have it down. Otherwise, this boat will
Otherwise
just
this-
slide sideways.
Yeah, well.
Our draft, I mean, we're at right now at approximately 50 tons, 10 of which is the cargo that we have on board in the form of these stones. This boat only draws 18 inches of water, and that's because it's a box. It's a flat bottom box.
Isn't that amazing? Think about that.
Yeah, you'd be able to put as much cargo in here to get you down to approximately 3.5 feet deep in the water. So we only have a fraction of the cargo that these boats could have carried.
Did you learn everything you needed to know by diving on the other ones, or did you have to interpolate a little bit?
Well, certainly diving on them gave us a lot of the information. We are also going to get a tremendous amount of information through documents, documents kept by the Canal, New York State canals. We're going to get information on the people through census records that were operating these boats. We're going to get information from primary resources like Theodore Bartley's journals. And yeah, sometimes we have to take our best guess at things on these boats. It's amazing how often the answers come together. We make our guesses and then we find out that, oh, geez, that was pretty close. Or I've worked on a lot of shipwrecks where I studied construction details and went, what were they doing? Was this a repair, or was this the way it was meant to be?
But you know what? I can see that once you get into the mindset that you actually adopt an antique set of logical thinking, and it's like method acting.
It really is.
Once you start that, then you're starting to think like these guys thought.
We call this experimental archaeology. We've created now an object that's fairly faithful to the original, and now we can start to use it. And we begin to figure out things like, how do they move these rocks? Here you have a cargo hatch. These stones are lowered down in, and this hold would have been filled. One of the things we found was a roller like this down inside. It was just a piece of hardwood. And I tell you, we scratched our head for a long time going, what are these doing down here? And we figured out, well, we hope we got it right. These are probably one of the devices they use to roll stones around down inside of these boats. Now, I said this is experimental archaeology. Have we experimented rolling around on these? Not yet. We haven't gone there yet. These rocks weigh as much as an automobile each, so we're not doing any rolling at the moment.
We've read and seen and spoken with a lot of people who've studied how the ancients moved giant stones, the megaliths and the Stonehenge stones and so on, and how the pyramids were built, and there are people who come up with new schemes all the time, and I'm sure rolling devices played a big role in all of that.
Yeah, a little smaller scale, but I bet it was in this case, but I bet it were helpful. Yeah.
All right, where next?
Let's head back to the cabin, which is really the heartbeat of the boat here.
Okay. Boy, I'll tell you, we got all the comforts of home here. Just talk to us a little bit about this cabin. This is nice. I love it.
Well, I'm glad you said the comforts of home, because that's exactly what it was. It was home for the individuals who operated these boats. Season started at ice out, which is generally late April, and went through the extreme end of the navigable season, which is December. And this would be the home for the individuals operated. Initially male crews, and then, as we mentioned, families living on board. We have documents of families with up to 10 kids being on board these boats. We just came through a bulkhead. This is the magic of 2004. That would have been a solid wall in 1862. So you would not have accessed the cargo hold through here, but because we wanted visitors the opportunity to come up here, we've opened it. And this, you've got to imagine everything in your home in a single room, because that's pretty much what we're looking at. This is the kitchen area. Wood stoves appeared on every single one of these for cooking and for warmth. As we come into late season, we're going to appreciate it. And yes, as crew in 2004, we do our cooking on this stove right here. Underneath the walkways on the outside of the boat, where it's lower, there's an elevated trunk to allow headspace, but then there was built-in shelving units. There would have been drawers built into these, and we're still in the process of refining ours as we go along. The only access in and out of this cabin space was through here, and you'd be going up to where the wheel was, where we were just a little while ago. Underneath the wheel, where we were standing previously, serves as the area of the bunks. It's got the wonderful stern cabin windows back there. We've built in a couple of beds into ours, bunks, these would have appeared on the original boat with curtain dividers for a little bit of privacy. Rocking chairs, benches, tables, and all the dishes you can imagine. And when we find these shipwrecks, they're a mess. You imagine your house being underwater for 100 years, but all the elements are still there. And we're able to reconstruct these cabins as a result of that.
And we reiterate that many of these canal boats that went to the bottom were loaded when they went down. I mean, we saw remnants of the bricks on the bottom from
the O.J. Walker.
Yeah.
That's right. And we do find these with stacks of dishes, as you see here. We find them with crocks with grape seeds in the bottom and canning jars with fish bones in them. So all a little window into their lives.
It's wonderful. It opens the window, if you will, into history in a way different. I mean, most of us have pretty good imaginations, and when I read these especially the first-person stories, it pleases me with my imagination to be transported back in time. But there's nothing like standing right on the boards. Right?
We agree with that. I mean, what better way to teach history and to feel it, get a sense of it, is one thing to say that people lived in a 15 by 12 foot cabin, but to actually walk into one and stand in it and get warmed by the fire that's a whole nother feel.
I read in doing some research a few weeks ago some recreations that a bunch of school children did based on what they read. And they recreated what life was like, and it sounded like first person. Mm-hmm. And then they had a little chat room set up. And the other little kids were reading that and writing questions like, where did they go to the bathroom? And a lot of that's what they said when the first capsules went up into space. How do they go to the bathroom?
Well,
these are things that kids think about. I bet you they ask you some good ones, don't they?
Yeah, pretty much every group that comes through here, we get that question out of them.
You do? See?
By the
See how my mind works?
1860s, yeah. Well, you're right on track. By the 1860s, as you see more women appearing on these boats, this will be described. This is the women's room in the cabin. There's a bit more privacy because of the curtains, and the toilet was the same one you would have found in homes, the age-old chamber pots that existed. So, the men's room, however, was in a different part of the boat, and we'll be traveling up there in just a few minutes in the forecastle area. Probably a less glamorous porcelain vessel, perhaps a bucket would have served just fine for the men folk.
Very, very interesting. That's great. Now, there's something below here.
There's space below this, and it would have served as storage for the family members. The floorboards could be lifted up. It is down in the bilge, so it tends to be a little damper down there, but it is storage. For us, we do have a fresh water supply on board, so you would find our tanks for that. We have tried. There are, of course, 21st century conveniences on the boat, although when the public's around, we try to hide them as best as possible.
But they're absolutely necessary for all the obvious reasons, and I want to reiterate that this is a pretty darn faithful replica.
We like to think so.
Our language is full of contractions, and what we call the forecastle is really a contraction for forecastle.
That is absolutely correct.
That's where we are.
We're in the forward section of the boat. And once again, we've defied the old ways. In 1860s, it would have been a solid bulkhead or wall that separated this from the cargo hold. This is the other small area of the boat which served a function other than carrying cargo. This was the equivalent of the tool shed, where you store all of the goods on the boat, your spare lines, your sails, navigational lights, the block and tackle, and this also had the function of the men's room. This was the man's domain, as one woman called it in a first-person account, very much like the woman you described from Champlain area. And this also, if you had hired hands on your boat, if your children were not old enough to serve as real deckhands on the vessel and you needed physical labor, you would hire a young man, and this would be where he would sleep on the boat. So I've established a little bunk for myself up in this area. It wasn't uncommon if you had a short-term deckhand to have him just sleep in the sail or on a coil of rope up in this area. But sometimes I throw a temporary bunk in for him.
It's kind of neat, and something else that dawns on me, based on what you've told us today and what I've read, life aboard these vessels did not change a lot from the Civil War era up until the early 1920s, because we're only talking about a 60-year time period. Mm-hmm. And these things that I read about and we've read about from the 1920s were just about what you've told us, and how they had an ice box on board, but they couldn't. I still call a refrigerator an ice box because I was brought up with ice boxes, but whenever they could, they'd get a chunk of ice.
That's right.
They'd stop and get some eggs, and they'd run ashore and maybe take a school lesson or two in some place where there was a teacher.
That's right. They would, for foodstuffs, they would typically try to buy a large quantity of their bulk food, the dried foods, the salted foods, in a larger area like New York City where you can have better pricing. But they had convenience stores, if you will. You could get off on the canal and run to a local market and still catch up with your boat as it was moving along. And we also had a phenomenon called bum boats, which were smaller vessels, which were, as this is a mobile museum, those were mobile convenient marts. When they saw a tow of boats, so 30, 40 boats going down the lake, you had a population of individuals that probably needed stuff like ice cream, like other perishable goods such as milk and butter, and there was your opportunity. And of course, I can only imagine, it must have been like the ice cream man coming along when the bum boats came up and people could access some of these more perishable items.
Ring the bell and hold up your sign that says A&P, right?
Yeah. IGA. That's it.
But sure, it was a part of commerce, and it was, like you said, a whole community. And if they needed something, there was always somebody to supply what they needed.
Yeah.
If they couldn't go after them, they'd pull into shore whenever they could and stop
That's right.
for a day or two. And a lot of things happened with these families while they were loading and unloading the boats at their destination.
It's absolutely, from the journals I've read, such as Theodore Bartley, it's an exercise in hard physical labor combined with extreme patience. They never complain about having to wait, and yet there's long periods of time when the wind might not be cooperating, when a lock mechanism might be broken, and they've got to wait. And when they got to a location, time was money, and they unloaded and loaded tons of material in and out of these boats, sometimes hiring on other individuals and sometimes doing it independently. There's a wonderful account from one of the Montgomerys who, while loading his boat, a rock was dropped, one of these enormous stones, and shattered 4 deck beams. Fortunately, no one was injured when it happened, but of course that cost him time and money in the process.
You know, since we don't have a lengthy history here in America that they have in other parts of the world, Europe and so on, we think of the 1860s, the Civil War era as not being modern at all, especially kids, and they don't think of that era as having machinery. But there was tremendous machinery available back in those days for building all kinds of things and for moving stuff like rocks and so on, and cranes, etc. And they devised ways that we can't. You know, we're used to big diesel engines these days, but besides manpower, there were some pretty massive machines.
Initially animal, and then steam. Steam power was instrumental in making Burlington one of the third largest lumber port in the country. They had steam machinery operating all the mills down there. They were, by 1870s, we had depleted most of our timber resources, and Canadian lumber was now coming down thanks to the Champlain Canal being finished about 20 years after the Champlain Canal. You'll see a massive influx of raw Canadian timber coming in, processed in places like Burlington, and then shipped out. The backbone of that is the machinery that made it possible. And still a lot of physical labor. You could use a machine to lower it down inside of this boat, but you're going to have to shovel that coal by hand to move it around the inside. An average, our work week today, we get upset with our 40-hour work week and lack of vacation time. At that time, 60 hours a week was commonplace, and making $5 a week was pretty normal as well. Of course, things were cheaper, but it still was a very long work week, and vacations were only beginning to be even thought of by the end of the 19th century.
And you mentioned before about how these boats would be, in the wintertime, when you had several feet of ice on parts of Lake Champlain and the canals, you weren't running the boats. And this woman in the 1920s talked about both her father's ships being trapped in Quebec City.
Absolutely.
If you had a late spring or an early freeze, you were stuck, baby. You had to wait.
Wherever the ice froze, that's where you're going to be for the next few months until it thawed out again. You're going to see communities of canalers. Of course, getting a southern destination was nice, particularly some by the 1890s. You're going to begin to see a lot of people living on their boats year-round. Sure, they would make an objective of getting to New York City or down along Jersey Shore and being able, they would be hundreds of these boats rafted together to form communities. But in some cases, your boat would get locked in somewhere and you'd have to make your way home and then find employment for the wintertime, whether it's going into the ice harvesting or going into timber cutting. They would find an occupation that would hold them over until the thaw in the spring.
There are places in New York State where people who are watching this program can get a taste of what the canals look like. Little pieces, sections where they actually tow canal boats through with I don't know if do they still use mules in a couple of those places down around Utica? Aren't there a couple of spots?
Yeah, there may be. It's one of the things I'm going to be doing this winter as we get ready to go down into the Hudson River and we plan our stops, and I'm looking at the school groups that we have coming in. One of the things I'll be doing is stopping at the other canal museums around the area. And I understand
there are a number in New York State.
Of course, it's so instrumental into the development of New York State that I think the Champlain Valley often got overlooked as a canaling community, and yet we are.
It's quite a part of what we are. We have a road right near Plattsburgh called the Irish Settlement Road. Mm-hmm. I did some research a few years ago as to how this Irish community came here, and it was the common belief that they came here during the potato famine. Guess what? They came here to build a canal.
Yeah, absolutely.
The good property along the lake was already gone by the time the canals were finished, and that's where they ended up.
That's right.
Interesting.
And particularly up here in northern New York, Champlain, New York, enormous communities, and Champlain, New York had probably the largest community of canalers in the Champlain Valley. So French-Canadian culture being intermingled with all of that with the opening of the canal, all the people who we are. A lot of our ancestors got their starts right here on Lake Champlain.
A lot of the great original folk tunes were written aboard these canal boats. Yeah, there was music.
Yeah.
There were a few minutes to play. And occasionally read a book and sing songs.
Sure, when you fall into a tow, there's going to be opportunities for families to get together. And one of the things they'll do is play music. And we're going to see things like fiddles on boats like this. You're going to see guitars, banjos, and even organs we've seen inside of the cabins of these boats. Yeah, really. We haven't found any on shipwrecks yet, but we have historical documents to say they're there.
All right, we got to stop and put a battery in. We'll be right back. We have fresh new life inside the camera now. We got a new battery going. Eric, just to wrap it up, and I know you have to prepare for a presentation, slideshow presentation tonight, but just talk for a minute about the actual business end of this. Some of these boats were owned individually. We know some people owned 1 or 2 or 3 boats, and some people owned a lot. How did that work? How did they arrange for their loads? Calvin said, did they have a broker who arranged for that on both ends, or how did that work?
Sure. There were brokers. If I was a merchant, and let's say I'm going to go ahead and purchase some goods, I have some goods that I'm going to want to sell, I'm going to bring them to a broker on the waterfront. He's going to be able to store them in warehouses, and as a canal boat operator, I'm going to be able to come in here and go from broker to broker. And I'm going to say, what do you have? Well, we've got some stone we want to ship, we've got some hay we want to ship, we got some apples, and here's where it needs to go, and here's how much money we're going to give you to do that. You can take the offer, or you can go down to the next person and see who's given the best dollar per ton, per mile, just the way a tractor-trailer driver is going to do today. A lot of them are independently operated. They own their own rig. It was the same thing with this. We also have trucking lines today, and we had boating lines back then. Wealthy merchants, such as Orson Spear in Burlington, could build basically a fleet of boats and then control the movement of the merchandise himself, cut out the brokers, cut out the middleman, and thus make more money in the process. So it is very comparable to shipping today via truck, and both the regards of having independently operated vehicles or vessels in that case, and lines of vessels as well.
Just an exciting and interesting piece of history as you've portrayed it to us today. I want to thank you for taking this amount of time. We're going to talk to a couple more people before we leave.
Good.
Let you get back and put your slides together. But Eric, best of everything to you in the future, and thanks for your commitment to history on Lake Champlain. We love every minute of it.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm so glad that people appreciate it and are enjoying it. So we'll continue to spread the word as long as they want to listen.
And I should mention again, just before Eric left, he told us that it took, in answer to Calvin's question, it took about 7 to 10 days to make a run to New York City and back, or make a run to New York City. And so you could do quite a few runs in the course of a summer, and the more ambitious you were, the more money you could make. It was a matter of economics. And now we have a boat builder, and your name is Liana.
Yes, Liana Tennell.
Is it Tennell or Tunnel?
Tennell.
Tennell,
Yes.
spelled T-E.
N-N-A-L.
All right, and where are you from?
I live in St. Albans, Vermont. I'm originally from Arkansas. I've been up this way about 6 years.
No kidding. And how did you get hooked up with this project?
I heard about it from a friend who'd read about it in the newspaper. I'd just gotten laid off from a job at a small boat building shop, building small rowboats called Adirondack guide boats.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you know about up here.
Yes, we do.
And I went looking. They were just finishing up the first year where they hadn't actually started construction on the schooner, but they'd built the masts and spars, and the small tender that goes with this boat that isn't here right now, but is back in Burlington being used for school programs there. But they kind of prep work for building the schooner, and I came and talked to the folks there and volunteered for a week. They were getting ready to close up, and talked my way into a apprenticeship the next year and a job the year after. And so I've been working with the museum for the 3 years of the building of the schooner. So
Amazing how a girl from Arkansas ends up at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum working on a schooner called the Lois McClure. It's just amazing. We used the word serendipity. It seemed like a good idea at the time, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did. It all worked out really well for me. You know, I haven't always known exactly what the next step was going to be in my life, and it usually sort of just fell into place.
Sometimes that's the best way to do it, you know. If you know what's around the corner, what's the fun of turning the corner, right?
Worked out pretty well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what actually you did toward the construction of this schooner.
Excellent. So there's so much in this boat that it's hard to give an overall picture, but it was bit by bit. So my first day of work, the first thing I did was to learn how to drive the forklift.
Oh,
Actually, all the boat builders who were there that first day, that was our first lesson, and we had all these stacks of wood. You know, there was nothing there yet. We started out with piles and piles of lumber, and in the beginning we started out with the large pieces that make the backbone. There's the keel and the keelson, which form a sandwich over floor timbers that run every 18 inches across the boat. We built first the bottom of the boat, and we built it upside down. So there's chine logs, which are giant pieces, you know, they're like this by this, that form corners for the boat. All the framing is white oak. So we built the bottom. It looked like, you know, this giant sea creature or something. It was this skeleton, and we planked it. That way we didn't have to hammer in the planking like this.
Sure, I can understand that.
And then we flipped the bottom over, which was quite exciting, and started in on building the upright pieces. First forming the box part structure of the boat. You know, the center part is really just a square box, and folks would come along and say, "Oh, it looks more like a barn than a boat," and it really did. It kind of looked like a big barn. There was a lot of work that went into that part of the framing. Every timber, the upright timbers are all mortise and tenon jointed to the chine log, and the same with the floor timbers. They've all got a dovetail mortise, and they're wedged forward. It's a pretty complicated and interesting joint. So once we'd finished that box type structure, we went on to the curved ends of the boat, which are more complex. You can see right about here it ceases being a box and quite suddenly curves in. So all these frames had to be cut and formed. Early in the year I had helped with the lofting along with Rob Thompson, one of the builders, so I got to learn about lofting, which was something I hadn't done before, and I helped him with that. And that's a process of basically taking the plans and drawing out full scale what each frame looks like. So for this boat, we only had to do that for the front and back ends of the boat because the center of the boat is a box. We didn't need to loft it out. But these ends, each frame had to be a different shape. And they're what's called double sawn frames, which means they're made in a layer of two pieces that are overlapped like a brick wall and bolted together to make the curved shape. You're not going to find a piece of wood large enough and to make yourself a strong curved piece like that. So each frame had to be made, it had to be fastened into shape in its place. And then the planking began. The planking on the sides of the boat is pretty straightforward. It's again just flat. So you're just running flat pieces of planking along the boat. But at the ends, it's much more complicated. The wood has to be steamed to make the curve.
Sure.
So we started out at the top with the whales, which are 3 inches thick, as opposed to the 1 3/4 inches of most of the planking. Those are the very top plank that really kind of holds the structure together. So we started with that. The general rule is an hour in the steam box for each inch of thickness.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, we'd put these great oak planks into the steam box, and they fill the air with the smell of the steaming oak, which is a really wonderful smell.
Yeah.
And we bent them simply by clamping them in place around the frames. It took a lot of people. You're pulling this heavy, hot piece of wood out of the box using leather gloves, carrying it carefully but very quickly to the place it needs to go, and bending it in place using clamps, and slowly working back, pushing it into place using ropes to help pull it. We used come-alongs.
How long a piece would you have?
Well, they had to be staggered because you didn't want the joints in the same place.
Right.
So, there were 16-foot pieces, there were 20-foot pieces, there were 10-foot pieces,
Wow.
8-foot pieces.
Wow.
You never wanted a joint near each other. So you'd have to have at least 4 planks before you could have another joint in the same space along the same frame. Every plank had to end at the middle of a frame, and then the next one would start. You'd always leave the planks a little long when you were steaming them, and then cut the edge off right where it went. There would be extra fitting after it was steamed, so you would steam it in place, take it down, and then using a plane, shape it to fit the one underneath it. So you started work from the keel, from the center, and worked up until you got to the large whale that you'd already placed at the top edge.
See, interesting words. Whale. There's a word gunnel, which is another contraction for gunwale.
Exactly. And you'll speak of the in whale and the out whale. In some boats, we'll have one on either side. This boat has a part on the inside called the shear clamp, which runs along the inside on the top edge. It's got a piece called the shelf, which runs in this direction from the edge of the boat. If this is the edge of the boat, there's this large timber that runs as a support for then all of the deck beams, which are all curved, you can see, so that the water will run out towards the edges. All of the deck beams are supported by that shelf, as it's called, that runs along the edge. And then they've got stanchions in the middle that support them in the center, up and down the length of the boat.
Who among the people who worked with you in building this boat had experience building something of this vintage? Anybody?
A boat like this had not been built for more than 100 years, so
Nobody
nobody
there
had
done it
experience.
before. Learned by the seat of your pants.
We had a variety of experience. I was the least experienced of the builders. We had a fellow from Maine who came down 4 days a week. He was the head builder. He had done closest to this sort of thing. He built some very large boats, wooden boats, and had a lot of experience with things similar to this, but but nothing like this again. And another fellow had worked at a boat repair shop for almost 20 years. So he had an amazing amount of experience with, with adhesives and with different techniques. And, then we had our other builder, most of his experience was with traditional small boats. So we had a really neat range of experiences
This was like a
coming into
college
this.
degree for you, wasn't it? Just building this. Look at the beautiful sunshine that's coming out
yeah,
as we speak
it's
here.
really beautiful
But every
out here.
day was like going to school, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
So much
It always
to learn as
it
time
was
goes on.
it was a work day, but it wasn't the kind of work where you're going in and doing the same thing every day. It was always something new, and you'd kind of get something down, and it would be time to move on to something different, and every part of the boat was so different. It was really different doing the framing, doing the planking, and then the finish work. This year we were kind of really into many little finishing things, and we had volunteers who had expertise in different areas. We had our electrician who really did our electrical work for us was a volunteer. The person who did most of our plumbing work was a volunteer. We had an amazing amount of really skilled people who just put in their time and wanted to be part of the project and help out. So there were some really, really special folks who came along and just said, yeah, I'll help this happen, I think we had around 300 volunteers help out on the boat, and there were folks who just would drop in every now and then, but there were folks who would come in, every week for the whole time period. People who came in, 4 days a week. It was really an amazing thing.
It's got to
how
make
much
you
it
feel
drew
good to see
people
it,
in.
and actually be on tour with it.
It certainly does. It is really nice. We were working on it pretty frantically after the launch, but before we got going on the trip, because when we launched it, there were still all these little things that needed to be finished up and done. And so we're working, and so I got to see it finished, but it still had all these tools everywhere. It had all this wood, and I was gone. I had some days off, I think, and I came back. And it had been, the trip had started, so it was all cleaned up. People were living in it. It had, food on the
great?
shelves,
I love
plates, and it just, it's really alive.
It's
really
wonderful. Did anybody do a video of the process in building it? Was there some chronicle of either still pictures or video, or?
Yes, we've got a pretty amazing photograph collection. Videoing was not done as well as it's a little scattered. We've got sometimes when we were really on top of it, and sometimes when it kind of got forgotten. So
There was too much to do. Well,
there was too much to do.
we've done a chronicle today, and this has been a nice documentary aboard. We want to wish you the best of everything. Who knows what adventures the rest of your life will take, and maybe we'll run into you again sometime. But in the meantime, this has been a great adventure for you.
Well, thank you. It certainly has.
It's been a pleasure on board the boat. We invite everybody to stay tuned for this program and more in the series that we'll be doing to commemorate the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration in the year 2004. And who knows where we're going to be next time.